screen is not going all the way up there, but it looks like I can see you, so you can see here. How well do you see the slides? Thumbs up? Yeah?
The first row is great.
Okay. I'm Dave Ferguson, Interim Dean, and I just wanted to make an announcement, mostly because so many students are here, and you may or may not have heard that tomorrow we're doing some visioning exercises that will direct the future of CAP. So we have, you may or may not know, a dean search underway for this year, and the dean search committee is being comprised as we speak. We also will be doing our own college and departmental versions of the strategic plan. The university has delivered its draft of it, first draft of a strategic plan. You can find it online under the strategic plan of All State. But we will be doing our own exercise. And so in order to jumpstart that opportunity, those opportunities, we wanted to have our own visioning exercise tomorrow, and it'll be two identical sessions, one starting at 8:30 in the morning, one starting at 1:30, going about 3 hours. You can come and go, but it's really important, if you really want to participate, to be there as they start, because there'll be important information. Now, the faculty know this, the staff know this. I think some of the student organization leaders may have distributed information. If you've heard about this before, raise your hand. Okay, so a lot of students may not have heard. We think it's really important for the student voice to be there. So whatever you can do to join us tomorrow at either 8:30 or 1:30, we would really appreciate your extra effort, because your voice will have an important part to fold into our considerations for what CAP is going to be going forward. And we all know we're not perfect yet, so you have a chance to move us closer to a desired outcome. So that was just the public service announcement, and now we can get on with the lecture. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Overby, Department of Architecture.
Everybody, I get the pleasure of introducing our speaker for this evening, Matt Wallace, Associate Partner at Lake Flato. Do I sound okay up there? Okay. Matt is the co-leader of Lake Flato's Eco-Conservation Studio, which fulfills his passion for championing projects that encourage environmental stewardship. He has studied in the past under Pritzker Prize laureate Glen Merket, who taught him the importance of sustainable practices. Since acquiring this philosophy, Matt has implemented it in a number of projects ranging in scale and locale, from the northern landscapes of Montana and Illinois to the arid deserts of Arizona and Texas, all while respecting each region's climate and context. Matt's recent projects include the Briscoe Western Art Museum in San Antonio, Texas, the Headwaters at Kamal at New Braunfels, Texas, and the pioneering, see if I can get it this time, the pioneering Marine Education Center at Gulf Coast Research Laboratory in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. One of Lake Flato's core missions with their design process is that designs can enrich community and nurture lives. And for Matt personally, that has gone beyond the design realm into some of the things that he does outside of the studio, such as he's a member of the River Road Neighborhood Association and the San Antonio River Foundation Board. Just a couple things here, doing a little bit of the abbreviated intro here since we're a few minutes in. But without further ado, please help me welcome to the stage Matt Wallace.
Well, thanks, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? I first wanted to thank everyone that helped bring me here, Andrea and Dan, Tim and Tammy, and also a couple other folks in the audience. I had the great chance to meet with the aggregate team, and I see some of you guys here, Antonio, Lisa, Barbara, and Danielle. You guys are here. The glue team, Eric, Richard, Max, and Mia. And also, it was really fun to head into Tim Gray's studio to talk about the Environmental Education Center project there. I also, and he's going to kill me for this, but wanted to point out that we have a Lake Flato alum and a Ball State alum. He went to both in the audience today who helped me come here, Sam Bondero. I know you're out there, Sam, somewhere. There he is, way in back. So Lake Flato, we had him. We've had some Ball State alums and interns in the past, and it's really great to be here. Last time I was here was 22 years ago, 1996, and the first thing I realized coming back onto campus was there are some beautiful trees now here. It's really been transformative from back in 96, so kudos to that. So I wanted to talk about architecture in terms of the landscape. Creating an architecture of response. And creating an architecture of response really means not only listening to the land, but listening to the people who live there, listening to your design team, who you collaborate with, landscape architects, ecologists, biologists. To have an architecture of response, you have to have everybody have a voice as part of the process. So the first time it really struck me about architecture as being responsive was when I had a mentor show me this book, Bernard Radolfsky, Architecture Without Architects. And it's really saying that some of the best architecture, responsive architecture, are ones that are built by and designed by people who live there. So these I just want to show you a couple in the book here. These are wind scoops in Pakistan. And they're all facing the prevailing breezes. And every single space in the building has a wind scoop. And what they do is they have a damp towel and they put it, it's much like a chimney, they stretch it out and they put it at the bottom and the wind comes down and it's evaporative cooling. It cools the building by 25 degrees just by this simple move. And it's beautiful. You could not take this building, rotate it 90 degrees, or move it and have it react the same way. Another one are these granaries in Portugal and Spain. And really, these are for drying out the grains. And so they have ventilation systems built in. They are lifted off the ground to ventilate from all sides. But what I love the most are the details about how it meets the ground. One would look at these columns and think they're over-designed. Not true. They're designed to hold out rats and vermin. And so when they climb up, they cannot get in based on the width of the pedestal. They're really, really beautiful. And once you start understanding these things, they become even more beautiful. And there's actually folklore that the locals say these actually pick up and walk around at night. So a modern version of architect, we can all have heroes. My latest hero is, I was talking to some of you today about him, is Hiroshi Sambuishi, Japanese architect who is doing incredibly responsive buildings. This is an observatory at Mount Roko. He works in the Seto Inland Sea, and this is an observatory where the brief was to have overview to understand the landscape and its connection to the city. That's Osaka in the background. What he does is he spends 2 years, I don't know how he has this much time, he spends 2 years understanding in 2 cycles about the winds, the sun, the rain, before he ever designs anything. He understands here at Mount Roko how the winds go. Well, in observing it for that long, what he did was he designed a series of ice terraces. These ice terraces are pools that cool the visitor in the summer, and then in the winter they harden and freeze. The actual frame around it is made from wood and stainless steel, and what he did was, going to the 2 years, he realized there was a special frost that would occur on all the branches, but it was only a certain size branch, and it only came from where the prevailing winds were. And so he studied and found out an exact diameter, and what he did was he designed this frame around it to then pick up this ice, this mist, and block the wind in the winter. Then what it does is when it starts to melt, it melts into these pools and then freezes. From there, they cut out these chunks of ice, and it's placed underneath the building in what he calls, I think, I want to say it's an ice shed underneath. But the magic of it is that then when it starts to cool, it goes through these chambers and up and out, what's called a wind tunnel. Well, I don't know if you can see. Can you maybe dim the lights a little bit for these slides? What happens is that there are vents on each side, and you sit. You can see this person with your arms up, and it ventilates your armpits. And so that cool air comes and in the summer. And so it's specific to place. I just wanted to show some of his other stuff, not so much talk about it. But if you ever have a chance to visit Japan, you have to see this. He does not have a website, but he does have 2 monographs. The last one before I start talking about my work with Lake Flato is Glen Merket. Glen had a big impact on me. I started to understand principles of architecture that were responsive. I started understanding the land because of him, and this is a very early one of his work. You all may know it, the Magna House. The Magna House was designed around the principle. This is off the grid completely. There's a cistern underneath. It's all about capturing water. The showers, when you're here and you're taking a shower, 60 seconds they ask you to take. So you understand water's placement. And at the end of this corridor are the downspouts. So this is the view that you get from inside. So you understand when you look out from it the importance of water. The incredible thing about this detail, this is an early one, and he was always been told that he's oversizing his gutters, oversizing his downspouts. The detail that he has for this is beautiful. What he started doing after this project is instead of having water come to the center, you see, water doesn't want to move in 90-degree angles, and if you look at downspouts, they're all 90-degree angles. What he did was he searched the landscape for the largest leaf, which happened to be a eucalyptus leaf. And he oversized the gutter by 1.5 times, and then he offsets the downspout so that when it funnels in and dislodges any branches. And so the very design of the downspout responds to the land. So this is me on site trying to put this detail in motion with the downspout. So Lake Flato. So I joined Lake Flato 13 years ago. I was in Seattle. I thought nothing would have me move from Seattle, but there was an opportunity at Lake Flato. I didn't think I would ever end up down in Texas, but after visiting everybody and speaking with everyone, what's incredible is that everyone has the same values and the same connection with nature and understanding nature first as a seed for architecture. Here's our office in San Antonio, Texas. We also have a satellite office we opened in Austin, Texas last year. But the most important thing that you will see when you enter our office or you see our business card or you go online is that you see the people first. So when you walk in, you turn, and there's this big mural of everybody together. So it's not about the building. You don't see a building. It's about the people and the collaboration first. So while many people think of us as a Texas firm, this is the extent of our work. We work all over the place, and we have people from all over the place. I was born in Iowa, so I'm a Midwesterner, so it's awesome to be back up here in the Midwest. And so with people coming from everywhere, from different landscapes, we have knowledge of those landscapes. And I was speaking with somebody today, and they said, well, hey, yeah, we know you have a landscape wing, a landscape architecture wing at Lake Flato. I said, actually, we don't. And the reason we don't is that we want to understand and partner with people who know it best. And so if we work in these landscapes, we like working with folks who know the landscape. So these are the market sectors we work in. Everything across the board, basically everything aside from healthcare. And while we have these studios or market sectors, we always cross-pollinate between the market sectors. We have people that might work on a house one day and a residential or eco-conservation the next. And while we've picked up some recognition along the years, really the one we're most proud of, the AIA Committee on the Environment. We really think that when we say the word design, sustainability is part of that word. And so these are, I'm going to be speaking about one in a little bit detail today. So vernacular values. So just like Bernard Radolfsky, we first look at what's happening in the landscape, what's happening naturally to inspire us and tell us what buildings want to be. So this is the AT&T Center. It's where the San Antonio Spurs play. And this huge move was based on cattle shade in South Texas. It's good enough for the cows, it's good enough for us. Government Canyon State Nature Area. This was a Coat Top 10 Award winner, and it was all about collecting water. So this was the old cattle troughs too that collected the water, so we used that as inspiration as you enter. And we didn't place it off to the side. The entry sequence, I was in Tim's studio today. The entry sequence is so important in entering a building. To understand how the landscape works prior to entering is really important. And so we didn't place a cistern off to the side. What we did is we took the design and we made it part of the entry sequence so you couldn't miss it upon the arrival. And again, World Birding Center, understanding that the building as object is not important. It's the landscape that's most important. So how do you see through to the landscape? Or how do you turn yourself when you enter? Again, going back to Japan, the entry sequences are so beautiful because you're never on axis with the building. That's a very Western thing, where you place the building at the end and you march up 500 feet straight towards it and you only look at the building. What they'll do is they'll put you off axis and you'll turn to view the landscape prior to entering. And it's really, really beautiful. So these are the landscapes that we work in. And this, I don't know how many may have our latest monograph, but what we did is we thought about the buildings based on the landscapes that they're in. The first project I want to talk about is a little bit of an older project within a mountain landscape in Colorado. This is the Bartlett Residence. Again, the entry sequence. I wish it would have been a clear day when these photos were taken. It wasn't. But you see how the building is depressed in the landscape. You're looking over the building, not at the building. When you enter, you start to understand its context. When you arrive at the entry again, you look through it and understand the landscape. This is the plan. Crazy plan, right? If you would look at this plan and tell me that this was an architecture of response without me ever knowing the site, I would have told you, no way. But the reason it looks like this is because of the landscape. The boulders, the rocks, the cliffs, all the walls are around that. They're nestled in to areas that are flat. Spaces within are created to frame this, so you understand why the walls have moved, why the walls are what they are. Again, you see the far view as you enter, but the near view is just as important. And that's one thing I would like to tell everybody as a student, is that the near view is as important as the far. Water. I work a lot with water in the eco-conservation studio. It's really important to me. I live in my neighborhood's River Road neighborhood, and it's right along the river. It's the only untouched portion of the San Antonio River, and I go by it, I walk through it every day. What's really important in starting to understand landscapes are what areas, and I spoke about this earlier too, what areas to preserve, what areas to enhance, and what to transform. This is a project, Marine Education Center, Gulf Coast Research Laboratory, we interviewed for in 2011, and that was 6 years after Katrina wiped out the original building. The original building was right here. It was actually an aquarium that was given to the university. It had no trees on site. It was 4 feet above sea level. It did not respond to the landscape. The new site here is a little anomaly along the Gulf Coast. It's 19 feet above sea level. This is what the site looked like after Katrina was through with it. This is the building here. You can see the remnants of what's left and how close it is to the water. This is the old building. And this is what happened with Katrina. So resilient design, understanding that there are things you can do with the landscape to help you design. And this was actually, a lot of this debris is not from the building. This is debris from other buildings that have washed in and washed out. So this is the new site. We spent about 3 to 4 months looking at the site with ecologists, biologists, landscape architects before we ever drew a single line. We understood that there were 3 distinct areas here. You can see these fingers that come down. Well, in between these fingers are forested bayheads, which filter the water into the tidal marshes before it hits the bayou. These are really important, sensitive spaces. Not only that, we searched and looked at the landscape with ecologists, with a coastal ecologist, Larry Lewis, who taught us that the most preserved trees, native trees, occurred in this zone. So this was the preserved zone. In the middle was sort of an in-between. This was going to be an enhanced zone, and this was going to be transformed. There was already a road here that was at the top of the hill, but it also was the one area you could have direct contact with the water. It was a marine education center. So zooming into the area that we worked on, you can see, again, the forested bayhead here, which filters down. So what we did when we thought about looking at the landscape, first have to understand where the floodplain is. At the time, the floodplain was at 16 feet. It's gone higher after that. Understand where the highest elevation is on site, too, and then understanding the building zone. So we made 18 feet around for the building zone. So this started to think about how we could place the buildings, what would work, what wouldn't work. Then what we did is we talked to Larry. He told us about when we do take trees out. What we did is we looked at trees that were non-native. We looked at trees that were at the end of their life cycle that would come down in a hurricane. And we started flagging those trees. When we flag those trees, you see what happens in Mississippi when they put a new building in the landscape, because they're so worried about the trees falling on the building, they'll cut a 200-foot wide swath and they'll place the building right in the middle so a tree won't fall. Well, what happens when they do that is they just destroyed their wind buffer. So in creating an architecture of response, you should have the landscape work with you, work with the building. So with understanding these were the weakest trees, it then created openings there in the landscape where we placed our buildings. And the buildings, we were able to place the buildings so close to the trees that this is how it looked when it opened. Again, creating architecture that responds to the landscape, having the trees buffer the buildings, understanding where to build. This is a 200-foot-long cable suspension bridge with one vertical support, so there wouldn't be any structure within the bayhead. To understand it a little bit better, here's a cross-section. You enter in this building here. These are exhibit space, offices. Here's a multi-purpose space. This is an observation platform, observing the bayou. 200-foot-long cable suspension bridge to the other side with classrooms and labs on the other side. Looking at the vernacular, we understand that these buildings were really steep. We understood that the pitch of the roofs, when it rains this much, over 60 inches, really important to shed water quickly. These buildings knew how to do it, and we took that as a clue for our designs. So this is the entry sequence. Your sense of arrival. What we did when you arrive at these is we created a set of porches here. But at the end of these porches, we turn the building so that there's landscape at the end, not a building at the end. This is looking back from that same view. And again, understanding that a learning environment doesn't happen indoors, it happens outside too. So how can buildings create an edge, a gathering spot for this to occur? This is the view through the building here, across the bayhead. This is a view back towards it. What's special that they said is they park, all the staff members park on one side, on the west side, and they get to cross the bridge and have that as the entry sequence on the way in. And this is the view back towards it. This is on the west side. These are a series of classrooms and labs that look out at each other. And then its presence on the bayou. So, understanding how to build and how to respond to the landscape, you have to understand what has the least impact on the landscape. So here we used helical piers. We used helical piers because they are very precise in where they're located, so we could miss tree roots. So, and it also lifted the building up so that water could flow underneath into that forested bayhead. So during construction, a hurricane went through, Hurricane Nate. It was a Category 1 storm. I was on site the next day, and there was one tree that fell. It fell off-site. It came within a foot of the contractor's trailer, maybe telling them to speed up a little bit. But the last thing I want to talk about resiliency in this project is that a lot of people have a before and after thought on resiliency. They don't think about it during construction. Construction, the landscape is the most sensitive. So what I really want to implore everyone when they go out and practice is thinking about how can you be sustainable and resilient during the building process. This is examples of what we did not do right. And this is where the suspension bridge was. Well, when they came and when they took down the trees, they removed the area in the bayhead where the bridge was to go. The bridge wasn't built for a year and a half. It created basically a dumping ground for silt. One silt fence was not enough. If we could have phased this to remove the trees directly prior to when the bridge went up, it would have saved portions of the landscape. And this is something we found on site 6 years later. It was written by a group of folks who helped clean up Katrina. Second project on the water I wanted to talk to you about is Confluence Park. Now, I have a story about Ted Flato going to a East Coast design firm who will remain unnamed. They showed him the model shop, and they said, "Oh, this is a great model shop." And they were asking Ted, they said, "Do you have a model shop, Ted?" And Ted said, "No," or a 3D printer, sorry. "Do you have a 3D printer, Ted?" And Ted said, "No, we don't have a 3D printer." And the guy looked perplexed, and he asked Ted, he said, "Well, how do you get your shapes?" And Ted's response was, "We don't do shapes until this one. This is our first shape. But it's responsive to the landscape. It's responsive for water. This is on the San Antonio River along the Museum Reach. It's a UNESCO World Heritage stretch of the San Antonio River. And it's at the confluence of the San Antonio River here and San Pedro Creek on the other side. This was the San Antonio River Foundation, which I'm a part of, who had the brief that the architecture firm had to work with an artist and be collaborative in their response. So we worked with Matsey's studio, Andrew Cutlass, out of Oakland, California, who was a main driver for this shape and their form. Again, understanding who you collaborate with and understanding how you design with people to make the best response is important. We would have never done this on our own had it not been to open our eyes and ears to Andrew's work. This is a view of it during construction. It's a pavilion here, and the main brief was to showcase the conservation of water and educate. So this is a pavilion that captures water, and this is an education building. So Andrew, in the design Charrettes, was saying, what if we thought of the umbrella? The umbrella and the shell pushes water to the side. Well, what if we inverted that and made a funnel so that water was captured coming in? And not only that, how would you showcase that? So that the best time to be there would be when it rains, not when it's sunny out. So this is an early rendering where you can see the shapes and forms with the kid enjoying it. And this is what it looks like now. The main inspiration for this pavilion was a petal, a tulip petal, how it captures the water and comes in, and then pulled apart. I have to say we worked with an incredible structural engineer, Chuck Nave, out of Architecture Engineers Collaborative, who made this possible. So how do you build something like this? This was a project where it was commissioned by a firm first who came up with something different, but then couldn't figure out how to build it. We were really worried about that same thing. So we found a boat builder in Oakland that Andrew knew and who worked with fiberglass and built these fiberglass molds in Oakland with a 3D printer. These were shipped to San Antonio, Texas, and placed on site. And there were 3 different petal sizes, and each one had a series of catwalks connecting to the other. It looked like a roller coaster. And again, since this is the building which is to celebrate water and educate on water conservation, these were the landscapes that we were preserving and enhancing along the San Antonio River. This was once a drainage ditch. And this is what it looks like today with the education building in the background. This is Sonny, one of the designers. And this is a model of how it works. Capturing the rainwater. These spaces, you can stand inside when it's raining and have water cascading all around you while it's being collected. Solar panels on top of the education building. And this is a space where children hang out, where it's collected. Again, the most important thing with Lake Flato, enriching communities and nurturing life, and seeing photos like this, where children are understanding the river, its tributaries, is very, very rewarding. So I wanted to end with a project that we have on the boards. This project is in Nebraska. It's the Rowe Sanctuary. It's a bird sanctuary, and it's for viewing sandhill cranes. So in Gibbon, Nebraska, once a year, sandhill cranes and whooping cranes fly in from all over and roost in the middle of the Platte River. The reason they go to the Platte River is because it's so shallow and wide. It's an inch deep, and they say a mile wide. And there, they circle and they land at night, and they land in the center, and then they slowly work themselves out. Well, the reason why they're there is actually a bad thing. The reason they're all congregated. They used to congregate along the entire stretch. But with humans coming in and planting trees along the riverbanks, they no longer feel safe along the river. And there's a 1 mile, 2 mile stretch of the river where the trees are removed to create that sense that was once there. And that's where they are. It's actually within a river channel. This is the north channel. South channel is a mile or two down. So this water can shift up to 12 feet on its riverbanks a day, or a year, sorry. These are the blinds that they had there. And again, being responsive, understanding architecture in that regard, understanding that a bird blind is not a bird blind for sandhill cranes versus cardinals. Very, very different. This is all about the group. It's 600,000 sandhill cranes come at the same time, and they land at night, and then in the morning, they leave. You're in this blind for 3 hours, they don't let you leave. And you either come at night, an hour before sunset, or in the morning, an hour before sunrise. This is the views that they have. When you go there and when you see this huge expanse, you want to see in your periphery the entire phenomenon. You don't want to have a frame to look at. You want to remove the frame so that you're with the cranes. So we use this precedent to show our client that exact thing. Imagine having this view with the sandhill cranes, but removing the top and bottom frame. So what we did is we started to understand humans' field of view. It's the old test. You put your fingers out, and when can you start to see your finger? Here. When can you start to see your finger? There. And that created view angles. Those view angles then were placed on the facade of the bird structures so that 97.5% of all humans can see it. It's from the shortest to the tallest, understanding where that falls. Understanding again that these are placed not on the river, but slightly back because of how much the river moves. Making sure that you saw every crane. But also, you were in these blinds for 3 hours. It's March. It's cold. There are jackets everywhere, people tripping over everything. So we wanted to create a space that did that, but also pull you back from the facade so that when cameras were used, when binoculars were used, it didn't spook the cranes itself. So creating that interstitial space, very, very important. Then we understand grouping the people together, standing shoulder to shoulder. Again, understanding the ergonomics, what felt comfortable. So the other part of this project was that for 6 weeks the sandhill cranes are there, but guess what? For 46 other weeks they're not there. So how can you create architecture that's flexible when they're not there? So they asked us to not create a bird blind, but to create a discovery station. So how this is used when the cranes were not there, just as important. This is one space in the back that were warming huts, knowing that people couldn't leave for 3 hours. Is there shelter within the blind for those who were getting cold? So this was the plan. Simple building. What we did was we showed them precedents of decks, shaded decks. Here, a barn door that flips open. They would always close this when the cranes were there because the crane can see through you. If you're backlit, they'll fly away. How corners are addressed. Seating areas. What we noticed when we were there, it's hard for people to stand for 3 hours. People sit in back. When they sit in back, they're staring at someone's back. How can you give the person an experience of viewing the birds and viewing the cranes when they're in the seated position? So what we did is we looked at precedents like this. This is our Cranbrook Middle School for Girls, close to here. And you can see that you step up and you're elevated when you sit. So we designed this into the back portion so that when you rested, you were looking over somebody and had that same view. And this is a concept rendering. It's under construction now, and for those that want to see this next year in March, there'll be 4 built. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. It's a great opportunity to ask Matt Wallace whatever is on your mind. A lot of students here in the group. Any questions from the audience? There we go.
Since your program has such a wide range of projects across the country, how do you address such different climates? You say you work with local firms, but do you find it difficult to kind of have that breadth of knowledge?
So again, what we do is we partner with architects as well, associate architects, but also landscape architects that know the place. And so while we work a lot, and we have people who most likely are from that area, and we try to match them up with the project to start to understand it.
Question back here?
Hi. So you guys work with the landscape for the projects that you've shown that work mainly with the landscape. Do you guys have any projects that are based in urban areas where the landscape has been so far removed from the what originally was the project?
really funny you asked that question because about an hour before this project, I removed an urban section to this. I have a tendency to be long-winded, so I deleted about 15 slides. But one of those slides, and I'd be happy to show you it, is actually of the Austin Public Library. And that is a new building that we've done in Austin that had elements of an architecture of response. And what you'll see when you go there is not only the daylit spaces inside, but we created reading porches that were on the southeast side of the building that's where the prevailing winds are. So those breezes, the shade structure, but also roof terraces that collect rainwater, that connect it in to understand the natural systems. So there are ways to respond in an urban environment, and it's all about context. It's about, instead of the trees being adjacent to you, the buildings are adjacent. What heights are the buildings? What heights could they be? Is there an empty lot next door? Will that be built on one day? What you can rely on, what you can't rely on. I had that same section up there because I knew there'd be a question.
Questions?
So it seems that Lake Flato takes a lot more time before designing projects, looking at the site, looking at the context. How is that with relation to clients taking more time to design? Is that a problem that you see come up a lot with clients wanting to bring things faster or anything like that?
So the first part of the design process for us is what we do is called an integrated design charrette. And what we do is we have the ecologist and the biologist there. We also have the owners there. And we walk the site together and we understand some of the constraints we start to. And having the biologist and the ecologist start to inform the owner and the stakeholder and the user groups, have the user groups inform us. They know when the last flood was. They know what happened. And from there, we talk to them about really understanding it before we draw anything. And for the most part, people understand that. And we have a document that's a living document that we update periodically. And it can be updated by the owner, by the stakeholder, by the design team. And that way, even though we're off and we might be drawing, we're still learning the whole way. So people think of us as having a style. I think when you're responsive, forms and have a way of presenting itself when you are responsive. But I think some clients want a style, and they say, we want this building on our property. And we have to explain to them that that building is specific to place and start to tell them. So it gets a little tricky sometimes with that. Sometimes people want to replicate a building because they love the building. But we try to make it specific.
So clearly, Lake Flato has had a lot of success when it comes to connecting the landscapes around the buildings. What do you think is the biggest obstacle to other firms approaching design in the same way that you guys do?
Obstacle meaning how to be more responsive?
Right. Like why don't other firms do it the way you guys do?
I really think that it comes down to the culture of the place. You see, Ted Flato and David Lake. Ted grew up in Corpus Christi, but he had a ranch about 3 hours west San Antonio that he spent all of his summers there. And he grew to connect with that landscape and love it. And David the same way. David's father used to go horseback riding up in the Rocky Mountains and take David there. And they wanted to surround themselves with people who had that same thinking and understanding, because if you don't, the culture breaks and you won't have that. So I really think it comes down to having a place where everyone is passionate about it, because from start to finish, you have to be consistent.
We have time for probably 2 more questions.
So a lot of the work that I know from you guys is mainly residential, and in a lot of that I can see the influences of, like you said, Glen Merket, especially in something like that. What other architects have influenced the work that you guys do, primarily residentially?
So a huge inspiration when the firm started in the 80s was O'Neill Ford. So O'Neill Ford was a mid-century Texas modernist, regionalist, who was a craftsperson. And he surrounded himself with people in the office that knew how to build. You had people that were designing light fixtures, working with brick. His brother, Lynn Ford, was incredible. He was a woodworker. He would do all the details of the doors. And so he's very inspiring, because if you look at his work, he was very, very true to the materials, to the sense of place, and at a time where a lot of people weren't. So he was a big influence. Another one, just one more, is Gordon Drake. So for those who don't know Gordon Drake, that was actually Glen Merket's, one of his mentors. He passed away, I think, at the age of 34 in a ski accident, but he was a Southern California architect that did a bunch of houses. They just created a monograph of his work a few years back.
One more question? No? Okay. Let me thank Matt one more time.